Hello and welcome to Foreign Dispatches, brought to you from London. I'm Doris Okenwa, your dispatcher. On this magazine show, I'll be sharing with you things that I see, people that I meet, issues that pop up around me wherever I find myself for time. Now here's the rundown of the dispatches we have for you today. Nigeria has decided, but May 29th is not the end of all problems. At the Commonwealth's annual lecture for 2015, former President of New Zealand makes a case for youth and the limitations security crisis poses for development. Speaking of youth and development, over 200 Nigerian students converge on Sheffield for the International Conference of Nigerian Students, ICONS. And still on Nigerian students, the search for Ozzy Akerele continues. The 24-year-old has been missing since January. We lend our voice to the quest of finding him and ask whether international students are getting enough support in the UK. It has been 1 year since young schoolgirls were kidnapped in Nigeria. The world will not forget the Chibok girls.
If these girls are not brought back and they are lost forever, it will actually give more people, more criminals, the impetus to suppress, oppress and intimidate women.
Now the Nigerian elections have come and gone, and by May 29th, the deal will be signed, sealed, delivered. Remember the last edition of Foreign Dispatches, I shared with you the views of Nigerians in diaspora. Though they are unable to vote, many of them were very vociferous, very active about issues, expressing their opinion on national issues. But what happens after May 29th? What happens after a new administration assumes the mantle of leadership? Coming up, here are some views about that. Many meetings, campaigns, protests and prayer sessions after the much-anticipated 2015 elections eventually came to pass in Nigeria. Pundits, citizens, old and newly elected officials do recognize that the incoming administration must confront existing challenges even as they take on a fresh set. At the London School of Economics and Political Science, I engaged some young intellectuals in a lively discussion about their vicarious participation in the elections and expectations for the days ahead. What were you doing? How were you following? How were you participating?
For me, I was actually watching channels like all day, every day. I think for the whole 3-day period, I was on YouTube watching it live, sitting down with my food. I don't think I watched any TV. It was just channels.
And I don't want this to seem as though we're advertising channels, but
I'm
actually
really not trying to, but
because
it doesn't matter.
We don't mind. We don't mind.
Of course.
Euphoria over, they raised some pertinent issues they feel should be at the center of a new political horizon for Nigeria. They insist that attention must be paid not just to a new president, but the machinery behind him.
For me, I think what is incredibly important is to watch what he does this next year, in 365 days, how he exactly implements this apparent change, how he's going to get rid of corruption, which is one of the huge slogans of his campaign, how he's going to give, the youth jobs.
Because even beyond the machinery behind him, there are other things we need to look at. We also need to look at the Senate and the National Assembly. So we've had a petroleum industry bill that has been there for about 4 or 5 years now, and that has not been done. So one of the first things I would expect him to do now that they have a majority is pass that across, reform the petroleum sector, ensure that it's performing to the optimum efficiency.
How do you want to give back to the society? Do you plan to go back home, or do you want to stay back in the UK, or?
Well, cold. I don't want to stay back in the UK, but I hope my mother doesn't hear this. In the long term, I actually want to go into politics. I know if my mom hears this...
Now we're talking. That's a good one.
I said I hope she doesn't hear this. You know that whole view in Nigeria that if you go in there, you're going to get
Killed completely.
And I think...
But that's intense.
It is intense.
That's an intense view.
It is intense, but it's the truth, isn't it? You know, even this last election processes, I heard in several, there's several things that happen. There are people that die just because they go out to vote.
How do you feel about
really
politics? Is that your idea of giving back?
Wow. A long time ago, I used to think that going into politics was the only way that I would be able to give back to my country. And I've realized, apart from the inherent risks of actually going into politics, like you mentioned, I could potentially be killed because I'm going in with a good heart.
But that's a bit extreme.
Extremely true, but it is, a serious risk to my life and the life of my family. But even if you take that aside...
But if you don't go, who will go?
That's the
Somebody
question.
needs to go.
That's the question. And so I said to myself, okay, what exactly can I do if I decide not to go into politics as a politician or like, you know, become the next president of Nigeria, which would be fabulous. If I didn't do that, how would I give back? And I used to say to myself, you know, I want to grow up and I want to change the world. What I've learned to realize is not growing up and changing the world, it's changing my world around me.
When I came to the LSE, one of the things that really struck me was the people like Kwame Nkrumah and the past leaders who had come through this institution, and immediately after they wanted to go back home. And they knew they wanted to go back home because they've had a stake in the country. So I think the first thing that this administration has to do is to get us back to that feeling that we have a stake in this country, that when we want to put our names down, when we want to put our expertise down, we're not going to be let out in the cold. You know, this whole view of godfatherism, it needs to be taken away.
I also had a talk with Paul Adams of the Africa Research Institute. We talked about Nigeria's economic outlook post-elections, with emphasis on a diversified economy.
If expectations are that a change of government is going to transform the situation over the next 4 years, people are going to be disappointed because those things take time.
But don't you think the idea of the state as a monolith, as a unitary entity, is an illusion? Because there is more to governance than the state at that central level.
The government can't create jobs, and very largely the private sector has to. I also don't think that even at the local level, state or local governments can create jobs. They can facilitate, though. They can make decisions about what's needed in which areas. But again, it comes down to education and infrastructure. And what can you do in a rural area with no power, no electricity, no water, no transport? That's the basic prerequisite for transforming the economy.
2015 marks a watershed for global politics and development as elections hold in various parts of the world. But growth has to be more inclusive, promises less elusive. At the annual Commonwealth Lecture for 2015 convened in London, some of these concerns were echoed. I was at that event in London, and here's what I came up with.